we should lay off all of the politically correct nonsense and, try to win elections from time to time.
Back in March, I said that I thought Democratic campaign culture had, quote, too many preachy females, unquote. Well, they all had a conniption. If you looked at the male vote that we got in November, no one since November has come up and said a thing to me. Primarily, we have a large problem with males. And I'm not just talking about white males like you and I'm talking about males all across. And we need to address that. And we don't need to be shouted down by Washington liberal advocacy groups, the NPR. We got to say we got a male problem and we need to get to work on it.
Hey, again, he is totally right about this. Will the Democratic Party even allow him to say that? Meanwhile, some of the other Democrats who are rising up against the progressive culture, we'll see how they do. Richie Torres, who is a very pro-Israel and somewhat moderate Democratic office holder, he's a representative from the Bronx. He is not ruling out a run for governor against fellow Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul. That would be a good indicator that the Democratic Party was starting to re-embrace reality if Torres were able to take out Hochul, for example. In an interview on Wednesday, Torres said he'd made no final decision, but he said that the gains that Donald Trump made in traditionally Democratic New York in this year's election are, quote, a vote of no confidence in the leadership of New York State, which, of course, is exactly right. Kathy Hochul has a 36% favorability rating among likely voters, 51% unfavorable. In an interview recently with Politico, Torres gave a withering assessment of Hochul. He drew a comparison to Democrats' efforts this summer to pressure Joe Biden to drop his re-elect bid. He said, I fear Hochul may be the new Biden. She may be in denial about the depth of her vulnerabilities in 2026. In the case of Biden, instead of speaking out early, we waited until it was too late. Let's avoid repeating history. Let's avoid sleepwalking toward disaster and defeat. Now, again, it seems to me that whatever comes next in the Democratic Party, it's going to have to be insurrectionist against the top levels of the Democratic Party. And so there are two ways to read that. One way is that the Democratic Party is old, it's actually moderate, it was Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And actually, if you want to rebel against the Democratic Party, you need an outsider, Bernie Sanders or an AOC, in order to really break all the things. And that person is going to run to success inside a withered husk of the Democratic Party. The other way to read it is that actually the guiding forces of the Democratic Party have been wokeness and intersectional culture with a thin patina of moderation. And if you actually want to fix the Democratic Party, you need an insurrection from inside the Democratic Party that is moderate in nature. It seems to me that probably the Democratic Party will simply attempt to paper over those differences again. That is the only reason that you are hearing now a rumor that Kamala Harris may come back. I'm not even kidding with you. Politico has an article today titled, Harris is telling her advisors and allies to keep her political options open. Oh boy. So, you are handed the vice presidency on a platter after running a terrible presidential campaign. You then are handed a presidential nomination where you won zero, count them, 0 votes, and then you proceed to raise $1.5 billion and spend all of it in 100 days, and you lose, and you ain't done yet. And why is anyone looking at Kamala Harris? Because, again, who is the person that they look to? The Democratic bench is unbelievably thin. It's Gavin Newsom, who is off-putting, who runs an unsuccessful state, who is generally too progressive for the American people, and who's preachy to boot. Is J.B. Pritzker, who I have no idea why anyone would consider J.B. Pritzker a national candidate. There's nothing, literally nothing about J.B. Pritzker except for the fact that he can sign himself giant checks. That says national candidate about J.B. Pritzker. Gretchen Whitmer committed some of the dumbest campaign blunders I have ever seen in this campaign, including, of course, that bizarre Doritos video, the communion video. Like, she's a weirdo. Like, this is not a good bench. Democrats may think they have a good bench. They do not have a good bench. And so they might just go back to the well with somebody like Kamala Harris. According to Politico, privately, the vice president has been instructing advisors and allies to keep her options open, whether for a possible 2028 presidential run or even run for governor in her home state of California in 2 years. She keeps saying over and over, I'm staying in the fight, which, please, I would love it. One former Harris aide said, quote, she doesn't have to decide if she wants to run for something again in the next 6 months. The natural thing to do would be to set up some type of entity that would give her the opportunity to travel and give speeches and preserve her political relationships. A person close to Harris said, there will be a desire to hear her voice. There won't be a vacuum for long. Well, no, actually. There's no desire to hear her voice. It's just a sign of the desperation inside the Democratic Party that she is considered a possible front runner for something like 2028. What an empty party they are. And what an absolute inability. Yeah, one of the things about having a dominant media complex that is in your pocket is that it creates a bubble from which you are unable to escape. It makes you uniquely vulnerable. You're basically John Travolta in the Bubble Boy movie. You have a genetic condition that doesn't allow exposure to the regular elements of politics, and you are protected from those elements by the shiny bubble that is the media. And the minute that that bubble collapses, which is what's been happening over the course of the last several years, the minute the bubble collapses, you have no systemic immunity to the normal forces of politics. It's not just that they've been exposed to the normal vacillations of politics, meaning their bad policy and the effects of them. It's also they've been exposed to a new media ecosystem, including people like us here at the Daily Wire. And they don't have any systemic immunity to this. The kind of blowback Democrats have been facing over the course of the last 3 years is nothing compared to what every single Republican in my lifetime has faced from the legacy media. The difference is Republicans grew up in the darkness. They're like the bane of politics, right? From Dark Knight Rises. They're born in the darkness. They're accustomed to it. Democrats have never experienced this before because of the media. It's created a systemic lack of immunity for Democrats. And thus they have to keep saying dumb things, and it's going to take a while for them to develop the normal reflexes that you require to succeed in politics. Okay, meanwhile, in international news, NATO's military chief is now calling on business leaders to prepare for what he is calling a wartime scenario. Now, again, this is not a giant shock. Obviously, he's going to do that given the fact that Vladimir Putin is doing a lot of signaling right now. He's threatening a lot of action right now. Here's the NATO military chief, Admiral Rob Bauer, calling on business leaders to prepare for a more wartime scenario with regard to Russia.
Business leaders in Europe and America need to realize that the commercial decisions they make have strategic consequences for the security of their nation. Businesses need to be prepared for a wartime scenario and adjust their production and distribution lines accordingly. Because while it may be the military who wins battles, it's the economies that win wars.
Now, again, that point that he is making there is actually a correct point. He's not saying that businesses have to start building bomb shelters. He's saying stop being reliant on opponents of the West if you wish to have a robust economy and a competitive economy with some of the worst people on earth. That is actually true. Meanwhile, the UK and France are starting to pick up the slack in Ukraine, which is precisely what Donald Trump has actually called for. He's called for Europe to be picking up more of the slack in the Ukraine war. According to Express in the UK, Britain and France are now in talks to send troops to Ukraine to deter Vladimir Putin. They want to create a core of allies in Europe as fears intensify that President Trump could withdraw military support for Ukraine. British and French troops could be among European allies deployed to deter the Kremlin from attacking Ukraine again. And they could train Ukrainian forces similar to how they did before Moscow ordered a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. One military source told Le Monde, which is a French newspaper, quote, discussions are underway between the UK and France regarding defense cooperation, particularly with the aim of creating a core of allies in Europe focused on Ukraine and broader European security. And again, I think that this is perfectly normal and probably called for, given the fact that any peace agreement is going to have to include some sort of trigger force in Ukraine to prevent Vladimir Putin from going in and restarting this war. So that is the current situation with Ukraine. Again, I think all of the sort of overblown talk about World War III is about to break out, that's about, no, it isn't. It isn't. What Russia is signaling right now is escalation in order to de-escalate. Okay, that's the actual goal. Everyone in this particular region is now looking for an off-ramp because they see Trump coming down the pike. By the way, the fact that Donald Trump is about to come into office is changing calculations in the Middle East as well. So, yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu's government announced that they would be holding a security cabinet meeting on Tuesday evening to discuss the possibility of a ceasefire with Hezbollah and with the Lebanese government. According to CNN, Netanyahu signaled his potential approval for the emerging ceasefire with Hezbollah during a security consultation with Israeli officials on Sunday night. On Monday, his spokesperson told CNN the Israeli cabinet would vote on the proposed deal on Tuesday, and they said that it is expected to pass. So what exactly is happening here? Obviously, when it comes to Netanyahu agreeing to a ceasefire, that's because it is a ceasefire, not an end to the war. What is Netanyahu doing here? Well, if this were an end to the war, one thing is very clear. Netanyahu would be calling for Israeli citizens to return to the north. The entire stated goal of the current war with Hezbollah for Israel is to make sure that Israeli citizens can go back to their homes in the north. A wide swath of the northern border of Israel has been completely depopulated by Hezbollah rockets since effectively October 8th, when Hezbollah started firing hundreds and thousands of rockets into northern Israel in an attempt to kill Israeli civilians. And Israel didn't initiate a its actual retaliation and military operations, large-scale military operations in Lebanon until just October, until last month. So what is Israel doing right here? A few things. One, they're running short on ammunition. That is because of the Biden administration slow-walking the ammo. And they know that Joe Biden, on his way out the door, is going to try to do something to Israel. This is just well within the purview of Democratic administrations. Barack Obama, on his way out the door, allowed the passage of a UN Security Council resolution that effectively declared the most historic parts of Jerusalem to be historic Palestinian territory. I mean, it's an absurdity because Barack Obama, of course, hated Israel. The same thing is true, presumably, of the Biden administration. You expect to see them deliver some sort of backhanded slap at Israel in an attempt to placate their progressive base. You have, of course, people like Senator Chris Van Hollen, schmuck that he is, suggesting that he hopes that Joe Biden strong-arms Israel. These are the people that Joe Biden is attempting to placate.
We've seen this pattern where President Biden makes demands of Prime Minister Netanyahu only to be ignored or slapped down entirely. And then President Biden sends more bombs and more money. That is not an effective use of leverage. So I do hope in these closing months, the president will finally make more effective use of American leverage to, at the very least, uphold American law, to insist that